Thank you all. Matt, excellent speech. Thank you for your remarks. Mickey Matt, lest I forget, got a pencil? It's what the MIC, military industrial complex, has grown to today. It's the military industrial congressional intelligence media academia think tank complex. Mickey Matt sort of rhymes with Mickey Mouse. You can remember it. Media in all caps, so to speak, because without the media, it doesn't work. Who controls the media? The rest of the Mickey Matt. So I'll leave that aside. I just want to talk about an interview that I gave yesterday. The cluster munitions came up, and people were saying, "Well, why would the U.S. Do this? Britain, Germany, Canada, Spain, they're all against it. Will they speak up in Vilnius now? Well, that's another question. But they're all. So why would you do it? Well, to keep the war going, folks. I mean, hello. Now, how did the president of the United States explain it? Oh, we're out of ammunition. We, not only Ukrainians, we. So I asked my friends, I said, we don't have any more shells for the 155 millimeter howitzer. I trained on 155. I trained on 105. The basic shells, we don't have any? No, we're all out of them. So this decision is based on, oh, well, what else we got? We got the cluster stuff. When they run out of the cluster stuff, what are they going to do? So, we got these mini nukes. I mean, hello. What I'm trying to say here is that there's a reason we're out of ammunition. And you know what that reason is? Because Russia, which hasn't been mentioned hardly tonight, was not a threat once the Soviet Union fell apart. That was 32 or so years ago. They were on their back. It was real hard to get NATO to spend a lot of money on building weapons. And even the United States, we prefer to build fancy little jets that don't work, okay? But not basic things like being prepared for a war against Russia. Come on, there's not going to be any war against Russia, so why prepare for it? Hello, that's what we need to explain to American people. Look, you have been brainwashed to fear Russia, okay? And how did that come about? Well, it's a long story, but the last 7 years have been really, really idiosyncratic in painting the Russians as the devils incarnate. Why? Trump derangement syndrome. Now, I hold no brief for Trump, but he's right in saying that he was prevented from reaching out to the Russians for lots of reasons, okay? They were reasons that had to do with the Mickey Matt and other things. What I'm thinking Americans need to know is you've been had, okay? There was no threat from the Russians. Matter of fact, George Bush said, oh, China and Russia would get along with them fine. George W. Bush in the early 2000s, okay? Now, what happened? Oh, folks, it's really simple. We arranged a coup d'etat in Ukraine, put in our own people, threatened to take over Russia's only naval naval base that is ice-free all year. So that's the story, folks. It doesn't start on the annexation of Crimea. Now, these are basic things that people can understand. They're not, theoretical, or they don't require a book. All they need to be told is, you've been had. Russia's not a threat, except when we made it a threat by moving our alliances up against their borders, despite our promising Gorbachev and Shevardnadze not to do that. So I guess what I'm thinking is, the educational task is really simple. Basically, to overdraw it just a second, you could say, well, it's our own damn fault. Professor John Mearsheimer said that 8 years ago. the crisis in Ukraine is the fault of the West. More recently, others have written books about that. Happens to be true, folks, okay? Now, when Americans can understand that, and when the Americans can get the true story about how we rejected every Russian overture to have a decent security arrangement in Europe, and when we realize that the Chinese are joined at the hip with Russia, then maybe Americans can say, well, hello, who are these guys running this war? Well, these are guys that have never had any experience such as the kind Matthew Hoh has had. That's big. Worse than that, what's it, 50 years since the draft was eliminated? What kind of people do we have in Congress now, except some fire-eating veterans that violate what I'm saying here? All I'm saying here is it's not a calculus exam, all right? The broad stretches of why we're where we are now can easily be explained boom, boom, boom in a couple of PowerPoint charts. It's not hard. We do Americans a disservice by suggesting that, well, it's a long process and stuff. It is a process, but we could start, and we could start with every one of you just kind of saying, well, look, we've been had with respect to the threat from Russia. We confected that threat, or we brought that threat on in Ukraine. The last thing I'll say is, if you need kind of proof, okay, well, if I've read one cable from Embassy Moscow, I've probably read about 3,000, okay? Now, one of them was written by the current director of the CIA. His name is Bill Burns. And he was called in by the Russian Foreign Minister, Lavrov, on the 1st of February, 2008. What's that, 15 years ago? You do the math, okay? And he was said, look, we have a red line, Mr. Burns. No Ukraine or Georgia in NATO. Red line. Niet means niet. Do you get it, Mr. Burns? He wrote that back in the cable. He played it straight, okay? George Bush, Dick Cheney, they didn't give a rat's patootie, but it's there on record. What is Bill Burns saying now? Well, in 2008, he said, the Russian foreign minister told me that this would be a big provocation. It would be a red line. Niet means niet for us to try to get Ukraine into NATO. Now he's saying, oh, this was unprovoked. The way the Russians, this was unprovoked, the way the Russians went into Ukraine. We didn't know. It was unprovoked and illegal and blah, blah, blah. Well, it was foreseen. It was forewarned about. People need to know those. Now, people need to have the courage to stand up and say, look, I know a little bit about this history here. What you're going to hear is not anything that you hear from the mainstream media, the M and the Mickey Mat, okay? But trust me. And if you need evidence, I'll give it to you. Now, once people understand that the name of the game has nothing to do with Ukraine, it's to use Ukraine to, as the Secretary of Defense said, weaken Russia, as the President of the United States has said, is to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. Well, hello, there's lots of stuff that can be worked with. So education, yes, but let's not despair, folks. I mean, it's pretty easy to get educated on. It's despite the brainwashing that Americans have been put through for the last 7 years. And I've been around a while. I've never seen the like of that brainwashing. Thanks for letting me carry on here.
Okay.
Matt, what do you think?
You're muted, Matt. No, still can't hear you.
Okay. How now? No?
That's good.
No,
Okay.
All right. Okay. So you talk about how people, when they learn about these things, right? They become better informed. They hear not just the corporate Pentagon narrative. They feel like they're conned. And a great example of this, and I don't remember which book it was. He's written many books. Our friend Andy Basovich over at the Quincy Institute. He talks about being stationed in Germany. He was a Cav regiment or armor brigade commander at that point. He's defending the Fulda Gap from a Soviet invasion, has been his whole career since Vietnam. And the wall comes down. And for some reason, he and a bunch of other U.S. Army officers go over into East Germany, and they meet up with their East German and Russian or Soviet Army counterparts. And they walk over to the lot to see, I don't know whether it was a bunch of T-72s or BMPs or BTRs or some type of Soviet machinery. And they said none of them could start. And they finally got one started, and it immediately caught on fire. And Basovich's anger, Colonel Basovich's anger over this, you've been conned, I've been conned, they've been lying to us, right? So I think that the other side of that we can do, is we can also build cognitive empathy. And to your point, Ray, about if the shoe was on the other foot and presenting things very clearly and simply, that's one of the things that we did with our advertisement that we ran we got the look, I wrote this beautiful letter. I thought Bill Astor helped me write it. Like, we had other people help us. We were so proud of this thing, and no one pays attention to the 1,000 words we wrote. They're looking at the graphics we provided, particularly a map that shows what it looks like for Russia being surrounded by US and NATO bases, and what that would look like if the shoe was on the other foot. And the Russians had bases in Canada and Mexico. And we've actually seen this in the last couple of weeks, right? Because Washington, D.C. is all hot and bothered over the fact that the Chinese have had sometimes the talks with the Cubans. And, to the point that you have John Bolton writing op-eds in the Hill saying how we have to invade Cuba. So this understanding of cognitive empathy and being able to present things in a way that gets people to say, whoa, if that was me, that's how I react. Bringing up that Russian soldier, that heartbreak, that you can, who's being chased by that drone, you can feel that, you can connect with that man, and you don't care if he was Ukrainian or Russian. You just want him to live because it's so heartbreaking to watch this man. And so, building that cognitive empathy, because I think one thing we all can agree on in terms of reaching out to the public, getting public support, is that they have to have skin in the game as well, which is what was brought up before about the skin in the game of Kennedy by Howie, right? So, but no, I appreciate it, Ray. Thank you.
We have